Concepts, Values and Wise Advice from the Billy Meier Context compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Logic.
Contact Report 9.
However, it must be recommended to them that they train their intellect and practice in the logic, because only by doing so are they able to master and use their consciousness and its powers. Through criticism, they inhibit the further consciousness-based development, as long as this criticism is illogical.
Contact Report 31.
Have you lost control of yourself and committed an illogical act?
Yes, I am really displeased and embarrassed. Good. I acted completely confused and lost all control over myself. I told you it is incomprehensible to me. I have really lost control of my actions. It is incomprehensible to me and also extremely embarrassing.
Do not get excited about it, girl. You have obviously just lost your head and suddenly started thinking with your feet. That can happen to anyone.
That was really very illogically acted by you. But the reason might be found in the fact that you had to face a completely unusual illogic, which you were not able to cope with. This led to a short circuit, so to speak, in your otherwise logical manner of thinking, which set off a veritable chain reaction of illogical actions, which could only be ended by running through their sequence of actions to the end.
Sure, it must be so, but I do not understand why I could act so irrationally.
That is very simple. A human being who thinks only logically can no longer imagine illogic at all. But if such an illogic approaches him or her, they are no longer able to overcome it with their logic and fall into a confusion. This confusion, however, triggers illogical conclusions that lead to such actions. These in turn have to die down before rational logic is able to break through again.
Again, that is very precisely explained, and it is also actually so.
As with all things, everything requires a certain amount of preparation. Nothing can be undertaken and fulfilled without appropriate preparation. But if it is illogically done anyway, then an involuntary act takes place which can never be of value. An involuntary act is synonymous with illogic and rashness. And from such an involuntary act, therefore, only illogic can follow. If, therefore, the creation itself, for example, were to act involuntarily, there would be no laws and recommendations to secure the existence of all life forms, etc. There would be vain illogic and thus complete disorder. This means that nothing could exist, not even the creation. Arbitrariness, namely, means the free choice of the will and thus also the free choice of thought. An involuntary act, however, does not presuppose free will, but an act or a situation or something else which one does not oneself consider is not capable of considering, or which one does not oneself want. Note, Billy of 7th Oktober 2000. Etymologisches Wörterbuch des Deutschen, Willkür F. Behavior and action according to one's own whim. Eigenmächtigkeit MHD. Wille, willkürmd. Willekeur. Core, free choice of will. Free will, voluntary resolution, inclination, consent, agreement, discretion, is composed of the word treated under will and aid. Cure, me. Cure, c'est cure. The meaning which has prevailed since the 18th century, aiming at the disregard of the interests of others see above, is already in the offing in med. Usage in such cases where the free decision of one side is regarded as a restriction or coercion by the other, sef. Mo, nashsiner vinde willekur. In addition, arbitrary adj. Proceeding at one's own discretion, arbitrarily 18th cent. Previously acting voluntarily by free decision, 16th cent. Tef, emad willekeurig. Explanation, Billy. Willkür, arbitrary. Unwillkür, involuntary. These are well-known terms that are used very often in everyday life, as well as in spiritual teachings and in numerous writings of the Figu. However, it has been shown that these terms are not understood correctly in their true meaning and in connection with many things, so that a useful explanation is necessary. The terms arbitrariness and arbitrary, in their original meaning, actually mean choice of will, according to the old word values will and choice. In this traditional conceptual value, arbitrariness is, in a positive sense, a mental voluntariness or free will, an inclination or affection, an agreement, a discretion or a voluntary resolution, whereby everything is always done of one's own free will. If a considered action wants to be done, or a considered word spoken, etc., then free will as well as conscious free thinking is therefore necessary for this, through which a conscious and thought-out thing therefore comes about, but which can be negative as well as positive according to the human being's liking. If a conscious thinking according to free will is brought into use, then an arbitrariness respectively an arbitrariness takes place. Consequently, therefore, a conscious thinking according to free will is just as arbitrary as also an action which is preceded by a conscious thinking according to free will. Arbitrariness, or arbitrary, therefore does not mean anything negative according to old conceptual values, but something positive, such as acting according to free decision through conscious thinking according to one's own free will. So everything that human beings do of their own accord must be based on arbitrariness, on the conscious choice of their free will, regardless of whether something negative or positive results from it. Thus, it is not possible for the human being to do or undertake something intended by him or her without making an effort of thought within the framework of free decision by his free will. In the 18th century, a further conceptual value was created for arbitrariness and arbitrary, namely, a completely negative value that expresses itself in the form of disregard for the rights and interests as well as the body and life of other human beings, but also through ruthlessness, arbitrary measures, arbitrary rule, negative arbitrariness, etc., and coercion as well as arbitrariness, negative action using one's own might, unrestrained, absolutist arbitrariness and threats, etc. In this sense, therefore, the terms arbitrariness and arbitrary or arbitrariness, etc., are of a decidedly negative sense and value. Consequently, there is no longer any connection whatsoever with the original positive value. An involuntary act presupposes that no thinking power whatsoever determines or can determine an act. This means that an action takes place involuntarily or without thought and without consistency, which can or must always lead to negative effects and events. Such involuntary actions, however, are only capable of life forms that have not yet recognized the mental consistency in their course of action. In other words, this means that such thinking life forms are still in very minimal values in terms of consciousness and do not yet have control over their thinking form and thinking power. Thus, they are also able to act involuntarily, that is, without prior deliberation, without prior corresponding thought work. They simply have not yet learned to really think. If this were also the case with the creation, then nothing would exist, for through illogic in this form, everything is destroyed before it is even created. A positive arbitrary act or process means real life in contrast to involuntariness. That is, an arbitrary act presupposes a rational thought capable of determining the consistency of an action. This means that the existence of an action is consequently assured. This in turn states, the consistency of the action is logical. Arbitrariness, then, is logic and deliberation, and secures the existence of the action. Thus, by the logic of the creation itself, it is clearly evident that it is therefore arbitrary, deliberate, and logical action, and thereby secures the existence of all life. Only where arbitrariness is given can the consistency of an action be determined, and thereby life be begotten. Arbitrariness is therefore necessary in all things, so also in the search for and dissemination of truth and knowledge. Thus, in order to make a truth intelligible, a way to understanding must first be created by arbitrariness. In this, arbitrariness means the means of communication between ignorance and understanding and between ignorance and knowledge. Through arbitrariness, which in this form embodies the pure process of reflection and thought, the rational mind is stimulated to work and slowly led towards knowledge. If cognition is then sufficiently advanced, further teaching material can be supplied, which is then also actually further processed and utilized arbitrarily, whereby further cognitions are then gained. In a course of instruction, then, arbitrariness is of very great importance, for only through it is the logical consistency of the course of instruction guaranteed.
In former times, visible proofs were necessary for the human beings of the earth in order to impart certain forms of thought to them. But by these visible proofs, they began to believe in miracles, and at other times they went astray. The present time of the earth has progressed beyond visible evidence, and the path of clear and logical reason and equally clear and logical understanding alone must be followed. Only these values count for the present time, and they are the better evidence than all those which are visible. Today, the power of consciousness, knowledge, and wisdom and love are of utmost importance to be able to walk the path of evolution. In Emmanuel's time, however, it was different, for at that time the knowledge of earth humans was in every respect still very much imprisoned in those things which can be recognized by the eye and heard by the ears. At that time, this ensured that the human being who saw and heard visible evidence became aware of his power of thought and thereby progressed evolutionarily. Today, however, Earth humans have emerged from this stage, have acquired greater reason and intellect, and have become very conscious of their power of thought. So evolution demands of them that they should also seize these powers and put them to useful use. But this can truly only be done by hard work of consciousness. This means that Earth humans now live in the evolutionary stage, since they must and can work out knowledge, truth, wisdom, and love for themselves through consciousness work, without needing visible or audible proofs. But if a human being demands visible or audible proofs at this time, then it is obvious that in terms of consciousness, he or she has not yet fully climbed the level of the new age, and in certain things is still a slave to the old time. The present proofs of the earthly Aquarian age are furnished by human reason, intellect, and the infallible logic of truth. These, however, Earth humans with their adaptable form of thinking must recognize for themselves.
Contact Report 55.
But mankind on Earth does not want to be instructed in this matter, for in his illogicality, he lives in the belief that everything he conceives of and assumes is logic. If he believes himself to be more knowledgeable than the truth itself, and believes in his ignorance to be truly knowledgeable.
Contact Report 855.
Clear logical and thus rational as well as reasonable thinking is surely always the prerequisite for creating clarity before misunderstandings arise. Therefore, it is necessary in every case that in one's own interest something heard or otherwise experienced is thoroughly thought through, so that the true or false state of the matter can be fathomed. If this is not done through real self-thinking, but only through illusory thinking, which also corresponds to faith thinking, then the effective truth cannot be found.